The night Enkuruka decided to use her own womb to destroy her sister, she walked straight into the one trap she never saw coming. The fire in Mama Ogbuike's hut was burning too high for that time of night. Enkuruka noticed it but said nothing. She had rehearsed her words on the walk over, through the dark path behind the cassava field, past the tree where the children said spirits sat. She set the palm wine on the floor between them and opened her mouth to speak. Mama Ogbuike raised one finger. Silence. Then the old woman reached into the clay pot beside her and pulled out a small wrapped bundle, before Enkuruka had asked for anything, before she had said a single word. She placed it between them and looked Enkuruka dead in the eye. "I knew you were coming," she said. "I have been ready since the last harvest." Enkuruka's hands went cold, and in that moment something told her to stand up and leave. She did not listen. That bundle was not what Enkuruka thought it was, and the person who sent her to that hut was not who she thought either. If you are new here, subscribe right now, because this village does not forgive and it does not forget. To understand how a woman falls this far, you must go back to where the jealousy was first planted. Uchina's Crossing was a village that kept count of everything. The yams in your barn, the cloth on your back, the children at your fire. It sat between two hills, red clay roads cutting through it like old scars, bitter cola trees lining the path to the stream. It was the kind of place where a woman's worth was measured not in what she had built, but in what she had produced, and the village never let you forget which side of that measure you stood on. Adago had always stood on the right side. She was not the most beautiful woman in Uchina's Crossing, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had never needed to be. She married Topchikwu in the dry season 7 years before this story begins, and from the first morning she lit his fire, she lit it like it belonged to her. Because it did. The compound smelled of palm soup and wood smoke and something else, contentment maybe, the kind that makes neighbors slow their steps as they pass your gate. Topchikwu was a yam farmer. Broad shoulders, a laugh that arrived before he did, hands that had never known a bad harvest. He loved Adago the way good men love their wives, loudly in public and even louder in private. He reached for her hand when they walked to the market. He brought her the first cola of every season. He told her things he told no one else in the dark, when the compound was quiet, and it was just the two of them and the sound of the night. Enkuruka had watched all of it from inside the same compound. She had come to live with them 3 years into the marriage, younger sister, no husband yet, no compound of her own. Adago had welcomed her without hesitation, the way older sisters do when they have more than enough and their hearts are still soft. She gave Enkuruka the second room, a place at the fire, a wrapper when hers grew thin. What she did not give her, could not give her, was Topchikwu. And that was the one thing Enkuruka could not stop wanting. She did not call it that. She called it unfairness. She told herself that a man like Topchikwu had been wasted on a woman who did not fully see him, that if it had been her, she would have loved him better, held him tighter, given him more. She turned her wanting into a story where she was the deserving one, and that story, told quietly inside her own chest every night, was the thing that rotted her from the bottom up. Then the harvests began to pass without a child. One harvest, the village whispered. 2 harvests, the whispers grew teeth. 3 harvests and the teeth found Adago's name and would not let go. Lolo Chisholm, Topchikwu's mother, began arriving unannounced. She would sit in the compound with the particular stillness of a woman conducting an inspection, her eyes moving over Adago the way you examine a pot you are considering returning to the cellar. She brought herbs wrapped in old cloth. She brought women who prayed too loudly. She delivered her cruelty in the form of concern, and Adago, who was too dignified to fight her in her own compound, received all of it with a straight back and a quiet mouth. One afternoon Lolo Chisholm sat across from Adago in front of the whole compound and said, loud enough for the girls grinding pepper nearby to hear, "A farm that does not yield must be replanted, or abandoned." The girls stopped grinding. Adago did not flinch. She picked up her wrapper, folded it slowly, stood, and went inside. Tobshikwu, who had been sitting 3 feet away, said nothing. That silence, that particular, devastating nothing, was the crack Nkuruka had been watching for. And the moment she heard it, something inside her stopped waiting and started moving. She began cooking Tobshikwu's evening meals when Adago was tired. She began appearing in doorways with cool water when he returned from the farm. She laughed at things that were not funny. She found reasons to touch his arm. She learned the map of his loneliness, where it was deepest, where it was most exposed, and she walked it carefully, unhurriedly, the way a hunter walks towards something that does not yet know it is being hunted. But 3 days before the night that would change everything, Nkuruka did something inside that compound that nobody saw. Nobody, except one person who had been watching her far longer than she realized. The market trip came in the middle of the second month of the rainy season. Adago left at dawn for the town market, 2 villages away, a trip that would take her 2 full days. She kissed Tobshikwu at the gate. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary. She smiled and walked into the road without looking back, the way women do when they trust the thing they are leaving behind. The rain began that evening. It came down on Uchina's crossing like a curtain being drawn, thick and relentless, turning the red clay roads dark. Inside Tobshikwu's compound, the lamp was burning in the main room. The soup on the fire was the kind Tobshikwu liked most. The compound girls had been sent to their quarters early. Nkuruka had arranged all of it. What happened in that compound on the night of the heavy rain is the kind of thing Uchina's crossing still speaks about carefully, in low voices, with the particular discomfort of people who know that the truth of it implicates more than one person. Tobshikwu was not an innocent man. A moment of weakness is still a choice, and Nkuruka had built that moment with her own 2 hands. By the time the rain stopped, she was already rehearsing her announcement. What Nkuruka did not know, could not have known, was that she was not the only one who had been planning, and the person who had been planning longer and more quietly was already 3 steps ahead. Weeks passed. Nkuruka went to Lolo Chisholm first. Not Tobshikwu, not Adago. Lolo Chisholm, the one woman in Uchina's crossing who had the most to gain from this news and the least reason to question it. She sat before the old woman with her hands folded and her eyes lowered, and she said the words with the practiced humility of someone who had rehearsed this scene many times. Lolo Chisholm's face changed completely. The hardness that lived there, permanent, architectural, cracked open into something that looked almost like joy. By the next morning, the village knew. Adago heard it from a neighbor's daughter who could not hold her face still when she said it. She walked home slowly, set her basket down at the gate, and stood in the middle of her own compound for a long moment before she went inside. Tobshikwu could not look at her. That afternoon, Lolo Chisholm summoned Adago to her compound. She was waiting outside with 3 older women seated beside her, witnesses. Adago understood immediately, chosen for maximum humiliation. Tobshikwu sat to the side, eyes on the ground, the posture of a man who had already decided to let whatever was about to happen happen. Lolo Chisholm spoke for a long time, about barren farms, about a man's right to continue his name, about what a real wife would do if she truly loved her husband. She did not raise her voice once. She did not need to. Every word landed like a flat stone dropped from a great height. Adago sat through all of it, back straight, hands still. When Lolo Chisholm finished, Adago stood, looked briefly at Tobshikwu, who still would not meet her eyes, and walked out of the compound. She did not cry. She walked home, went inside, bolted the door, and began to cook. And while she cooked, she made a decision. The kind of decision that does not arrive with noise. The kind that arrives quietly, the way a river decides to change direction, not in a single moment but over time, wearing away at the stone beneath until the path simply becomes something new. If you are enjoying this story, drop a comment below and let me know. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it now. The best part of this story is still coming. Before the next sunrise, a doggo walked to the forked stream. Mama Ogbuik's hut sat where the two streams divided, surrounded by plants whose names only the old woman knew. A doggo did not bring anything. No palm wine, no cloth, just herself and the truth. The old woman opened the door before she knocked. They sat together for a long time. And here is what came out, what a doggo had carried alone for 3 weeks. A child from the village had seen Enkuruka on the dark path behind the cassava field one night, and had told his mother, who had not understood what she was hearing but had repeated it to a friend, who had repeated it to a doggo. A doggo had known, before the rain, before the trip to the market. She had known Enkuruka was building towards something, and she had made the most painful choice a woman can make. She had stepped aside and let it happen. Because she understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who had been underestimated her whole marriage, that no accusation she made would ever be believed in this village without proof. She needed the village to see. Mama Ogbuik listened to all of it without interrupting. When a doggo finished, the old woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Come back before the next market day, and in the meantime send her to me." What a doggo asked of her was not revenge. It was something quieter, something that required only patience and the particular wisdom of a woman who had watched this village lie to itself for 70 years. Something permanent. Meanwhile, Enkuruka had installed herself on her new throne. She began sitting in a doggo's chair at the evening fire. She began directing the compound girls with the authority of a woman who had already decided the transfer of power was complete. She wore a doggo's good purple wrapper to the Sunday market, the one Topchikwu had bought from the northern traders 2 seasons ago, and she walked through the stalls with her chin lifted and her hands resting on her stomach. Lolo Chisholm watched all of this with deep satisfaction. She was already speaking to Topchikwu about a second wife ceremony. Topchikwu, hollowed out by guilt and too weak to locate his own spine, was beginning to consider it. A doggo watched from a distance. She said nothing. She continued to cook. She continued to tend the compound. And she waited with the patience of a woman who already knew how the story ended. The elders say that pride is the only animal that digs its own grave, and then lies down in it willingly. The child came on a moonless night. The whole compound was awake, neighbors pressed along the outer wall, compound girls huddled near the door, Lolo Chisholm seated at the center of it, all like a woman presiding over her greatest achievement. Topchikwu stood just outside the hut with his arms folded, performing the calm of a man who was not as calm as he appeared. Old Yoruchi worked quietly inside. She had caught more bobbies in Uchina's crossing than anyone could count. Her hands knew what to do before her mind gave instructions. The child arrived loud and healthy. For one moment the compound exhaled. Then Yoruchi went still. She held the child close to the lamp. She studied the left shoulder. She studied it again. The women around her felt the silence shift and went still with her, the way a flock of birds all turns at once without a signal. Yoruchi cleared the hut. Every woman, every girl. She looked at the doorway until even Lolo Chisholm, who had never been asked to leave anywhere in her life, stood and walked outside. Then she called Topchikwu. He went in. 20 minutes passed. When Topchikwu walked out, he did not look like a man who had just been given a child. He walked to the middle of the compound, stopped and sat down in the dirt. No chair, no mat, just the bare ground. And the sound that came out of him was not crying. It was something older and uglier than tears, the sound of a man understanding, all at once, the full depth of what he had lost and what had been done to him. The whole village stood and watched. Not one person spoke. Stay until the very end, because what is about to be revealed will reframe everything you have watched from the beginning. Yoruchi had seen a birthmark. It sat on the child's left shoulder, a small dark shape, slightly raised, curved like a river bend. Everyone in Uchina's crossing knew that mark. It appeared on the children of Aquara, a traveling trader who had come through the village every season for years selling cloth, buying palm oil, staying 3 or 4 days at a time before moving on. He had fathered children in several places. The mark was his signature, unmistakable. Aquara had died 2 rainy seasons ago. His child was alive, here in Enkuruka's arms. The pregnancy had not begun on the night of the heavy rain. It had been growing long before Adago left for the market town, long before Enkuruka made her calculated move. She had already been carrying Aquara's child when she stepped into Topchikwu's compound with warm soup and a burning lamp. She had taken a truth that already existed and dressed it in a borrowed lie, the way you dress a stolen goat in a different color and walk it through the market hopping no one looks closely enough. She had not trapped Topchikwu with a pregnancy. She had trapped herself with one. And the bundle, the small wrapped bundle Mama Ogbuik had pulled from the clay pot that night before Enkuruka had spoken a single word, it was unwrapped now in the village's collective understanding. River clay, dry leaves, nothing inside. The old woman had given Enkuruka nothing but a convincing performance and the confidence to walk fully into her own destruction. Because 3 days before Enkuruka arrived at that hut, Adago had already been there, already told Mama Ogbuik everything, already asked her to let Enkuruka believe she had received something powerful. The trap was not set the night of the rain. It was set the morning Adago walked to the forked stream before sunrise, with nothing in her hands except the truth. The village gathered the way it always gathers for collapse, without being called, without being told, simply present, the way air fills a room. Enkuruka stood in the compound with the child against her chest, her mouth opened twice. Both times nothing came. The rehearsed words, the explanations she had prepared, the alternative versions of events she had constructed during sleepless nights, all of it had dissolved. There was nothing left to say that the birthmark had not already said louder. Lolo Chisholm sat on her stool with her eyes on the ground. The woman who had publicly shredded Adago's dignity in this same compound, who had called her a farm that could not yield, who had chosen a side with spectacular confidence, she could not raise her face. Topchikwu remained in the dirt where he had sat down. He had not moved. Adago stood at the entrance to the main house. She looked at all of it, her husband in the dirt, her sister wordless, her mother-in-law folded into herself, the village watching with the particular stillness of people witnessing something they will be describing for the rest of their lives. She did not speak, she did not cry, she did not perform the victory the village was waiting for. She turned, walked inside, and began to cook. And that silence, that return to the fire, was the most devastating thing anyone in Uchina's crossing had ever witnessed. Because it said, more clearly than any confrontation could, I was never afraid of you. I was only waiting. Enkuruka left at dawn, child on her back, one cloth around her waist, not one borrowed wrapper, not a word to her sister. She walked out of the compound gate and did not look back at the place that had fed her, sheltered her, and called her family. The village watched her go the way you watch smoke disappear, with the quiet understanding that something has burned, and the burning is done. The elders of Uchina's crossing say this: a woman who tries to plant herself in another woman's soil does not grow. She rots, and the soil remembers everything. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, drop a comment below, and if you are not yet part of this village, subscribe now. Because the next story will go even deeper than this.